Well, it's been said that great leaders are avid readers. And today we're going to talk about that on the show today. My guest has a special passion for helping those in leadership roles understand the value of being a good reader. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I am your host, Doug Thorpe, and today we're going to explore the world of reading. Now, I know for many of you, that's a passion you already have, but I've got a guest today, Mr. Danny Brassell. Danny, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug, and thanks for all you do. I absolutely love your podcast. You're doing a great service for the world. We need more of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. When I met Danny, we had a great talk about his passion for reading. He's been an educator, and I'm going to let him tell all of his story, but it's a very refreshing view, I think, and maybe if you struggle, as quite frankly I have through my life, and we'll get into that story at some point here, reading has such a great impact and value, and with all the technology out, good old-fashioned picking up a book and reading it seems to be a dying breed, but we're going to talk about that too. So, Danny, let's start with the backstory. How did you kind of get to where you are right now?
That's a very loaded question, Doug. I'll try and condense it. It's ironic. I'm now considered America's leading reading ambassador. And the reason it's ironic is I grew up hating reading. My father was a public librarian, and I always hated the public library. It always had uncomfortable furniture. It always smelt funny to me. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. And there was always some freaky homeless guy who thought he was a vampire hanging out by the bookshelves. I always hated the library. And it wasn't until many years later when I started teaching in the inner city, and I saw a lot of my students didn't have a lot of the advantages that I had growing up. I mean, Doug, I took a lot of things for granted. I had both of my parents in the home. We were not wealthy, but we never didn't have food on the table. My parents read to us kids, in front of us kids. We always had plenty of access to books. And I really became passionate for that because, books are, I think one of the most important characteristics of any human being, any successful human being, is curiosity. And books help take you down that rabbit hole of curiosity.
Yeah, I think that is such an important element of life, and I do think people put a lot of weight on the education system, and God love the educators, right? 2 of my kids are educators. 4 of my kids are educators. I gotta get my roster right, and my point where I'm going with my rabbit that I'm chasing right now is the idea that I love what you said about it kind of started at a home. I think that's important for the parents to understand that teachers can do a lot and they can sway, but if it's not reinforced or if it didn't start at home, it's hard as heck for the educators to be able to do it.
That's such an important point, Doug. I mean, I've asked thousands, tens of thousands of people, how did you learn how to read? And I've never had a person say, well, my grandma, Nana, she used to sit me on her lap on her rocking chair, and we'd rock back and forth. And Nana would open up that book, smile at me, point at the words, and go, alligator, ball. No, I have never heard anybody say that. It usually began with little kids. They watch dad reading the newspaper, and they start mimicking dad, and they see how mom reads aloud a nice nursery rhyme to them, and they start memorizing the nursery rhymes. And there's all kinds of research that actually supports this, that shows that the kids, and actually when I worked in preschools, that's where I really discovered there's where your learning gap is some kids enter preschool here and some kids enter here, and that gap just widens throughout school. People it's very convenient to blame schools for every societal problem. I mean, this is the American characteristic lately, is nobody is willing to ever take responsibility for anything. And so let's just blame this institution or this person. And, all of us are to blame, and all of us are also part of the solution. And that's what I focus on, is the solution.
In all of your work, Danny, and I'm going to sound like I want to dive straight into the numbers. In all of your work, if you had to stratify the adult population in America, are there tranches or buckets of those that are avid readers versus those that are just casual or those that don't read at all? Is there a
Well,
stratification?
yeah, this is going to be depressing because I can say more of your listeners are going to be readers because there's plenty of data that suggests people listen to podcasts, people that are interested in personal development, they're going to be more interested in reading. This is insulting to us as a gender, but women far outnumber men in the type of readers we are. But I think that the fault lies back when you go back to schools. This is something I always point out to people. The research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. And I think one of the biggest issues I have in schools, and this isn't to rag on schools, but it's something that we could be better at, is they assign reading. And I'm not saying that the classics aren't important, but I remember when I was in high school, I was forced to read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And no offense to anybody that loves The Scarlet Letter, it's a story of Hester Prynne commits adultery, and so she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand and asked my high school English teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. And if that teacher was smart, she would have said, well, what are you interested in, Danny? I mean, my seventh grade reading teacher was a guy by the name of Will Hobbs, who's now a best-selling young adult author. And he used the single greatest strategy I've ever seen a teacher use to get a kid interested in reading. He found out what I was interested in, which was football. And at least once a week, he'd bring me a football book and say, hey, Danny, check out this book on John Elway. I know you'll like it. What are the odds I open up that book? In my experience with all age levels, 100%. Kid might not read it, but they are going to open it. And I've also found by the fourth or fifth time I do that with a kid, they're going to try and read that book because there's nothing more powerful than somebody significant in your life, a teacher, a coach, a pastor, a parent, an older sibling saying, I was thinking of you when I was reading this. And so this is the very long answer to your very short question is the adult population, those people that are listening right now that might not consider themselves avid readers, it's not too late. I have all kinds of tricks. This is what I teach people, are the tricks of the trade. It doesn't have to be too difficult, and it's not too late. And if you're listening to this podcast, there's a lot of research out there. This is kind of fascinating. A lot of people don't know that over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are dyslexic. And people don't know this about dyslexia. First of all reading disabilities are curable, and dyslexia is probably the most undiagnosed reading disability out there. But dyslexics tend to be auditory learners. And so the research is very clear on this. It's just as good to be read aloud to as to read on your own. And so for those people that think that they're not readers, well, if you're listening to Audible, you're a reader. That counts. You don't have to read it physically yourself. Listen to the book. This is why I listen to podcasts. I was sharing with you earlier. I'm like, I have to catch all your podcasts and your newsletters because you have so many gems. I mean, there's a lot of people producing content that has no value. You have a lot of value on this show. I'm like, wow, I always learn something. I'll read a full book. If there's one anecdote in there, I actually just read a book and it wasn't the greatest book, but there was an anecdote in there that I'm like, oh, worth the entire read just for that anecdote. And so those people out there that might not consider themselves avid readers, well, I can challenge you. I can show you ways to make you an avid reader. And we talked about this again before the show. There's plenty of readers that don't necessarily become effective leaders, but I have never, ever read about an effective leader that was not an avid reader.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. I see it time and time again with my clients, those that are already at the top of their game and they're just asking a coach for some fine tuning and next step kind of development. Inevitably, when you get into their story, they will admit either book form or Audible or on tablet, some electronic reader, they're big consumers. And they've even pursued those speed reading programs and courses to help them assimilate more. And it shows in the dialogue, it shows in the work. we can bring up a topic and they'll go, well, that reminds me of what so-and-so said in his book. Did you read this one? And I'm always getting asked if I've read these books. And
Yeah.
I have to say, I just don't have time in the day to read all the books that I get recommended. And I'm going to shift gears on that note, Danny. I shared with you in our ramp up call. I have a personal experience that I'm not embarrassed to share with the audience. When I was growing up, we moved across town and I was in second grade, but we did it in the spring semester of that school year, which meant we were still on a 6 times 6 week structure to the school year. I was moving in the 5th, 6th week period of the year. I got to the new school and they were the most highly ranked and rated and thought of school district in the whole territory at the time. And they looked at my record and the school I was coming from and they said, ooh, for him to pass from second grade to third grade, we're going to need him to make up all our reading work for the whole second grade school year. So I had 5-6 weeks worth of reading to cram in to the one last set of 6 weeks I had left to graduate. And I did it, but it was a forced march. I mean, it was, I'm a little bit like you. My family was not super wealthy. We did our laundry at the neighborhood laundromat, and I'd be up at the laundromat with my mom and sitting in a chair up there working on one of my readers while my kids were riding by, my friends were riding by on their bicycles, you know. Hey, Doug, come out and play. And it's like, can't, got to read. Well, guess what that did to my attitude about reading?
Of course.
And it even influenced my ultimate postgraduate decisions about whether or not to go to law school. When I thought about going to law school, all I thought about was the volume of reading I would have to do. And I said, nah, no, thanks. I'm not going to do that. So it, you know, arguably had a career change. Now, looking back, I don't regret that. Ultimately, from a career standpoint, but the way it's manifested itself in my adult life, I do read. I do strive to consume certain books, but from an emotional standpoint, I'm on a roller coaster. I'll get into windows of time where I'm very willing to read. I'll just consume books, but then I'll burn out, and it's like, nah, don't really want to pick one up. So
yeah. That's why I always tell people to balance your reading. I mean, I love biographies. I love personal development, leadership books. But if I want to have fun, I'll read like a football. I still read football books, sports books. I love sports stories. Yeah. I have 3 kids. And so with each of my kids, each of us we have a book that we read together. And it kills me. My youngest, she's interested in literature, and so I'm reading with her The Great Gatsby, which I hate that book. I hate the story. It drives me nuts. But at least reading it with my daughter now, I'm like, oh, F. Scott Fitzgerald was a really gifted writer. I mean, you look at the sentences and everything. I mean, and that's what I would say with you, Doug. I mean, anybody who reads your newsletter, I'm like, there's no way you're not a reader. I mean, the way you construct your blog, I mean, I can tell immediately. It's the same. Anybody that's good at something, they've watched a lot of models. You know, Michael Jordan, before he became the greatest basketball player in the world, he watched people and he watched the best. And that's what you've been doing. And it's reflective in your writing.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And the check's in the mail. Well, what do you say to someone that would show up on your doorstep and say, Danny, I need help. I just can't get particularly motivated to read, or, you know, I'm stuck. I've never thought I'd consume that well, or maybe I struggle with one of those sort of maladies that impairs my ability to comprehend what I'm
just
reading.
Nobody ever excited them. I mean, and they never show up on my doorstep. So one of the things that I do, Doug, is I'll go out for like corporate executives that are trying to develop a speech. And so for 2 days, I come and visit them. And for 2 days, we basically walk a half a marathon each day and have sushi and talk. For 2 days, I record everything. And basically, we're crafting their speech, which if they want is also a way to craft their book because it's their story. And I'm just sharing anecdotes all the time. And I've dealt with so many executives that have said, well, I've never had time to read. I'm like, yeah, I mean, who has time to read after you watch the game on TV, have a couple of beers, go out shopping? I mean, I have a friend who's a time management expert, and I give him a hard time. I'm like, there's no such thing as time management. There's priority management. I did a study recently, and I found out that 100 years ago, people only had 24 hours in their day as well. So how are you using that time? I mean, you'd be amazed how much time people waste all the time. And so that's one of the things I'll also tell people is because I know, Doug, when we're talking about you as a reader, you're not reading Jane Austen right now. And I'm not putting down Jane Austen. I think Jane Austen's wonderful. But you're reading a lot of like leadership blogs and leadership books. And I mean, you can see it based on the anecdotes. I'm like, oh, but you have ones that I haven't heard. I'm like, oh, this is a good one. And that's what I'm always looking for is give me one of the books I just read was fascinating story was the old owner of that's the Washington Commanders. It used to be the Washington football team. Before that was the Washington Redskins, which is a derogatory term. And the owner, I think his name was George Preston Marshall. For many years, he was this racist guy. He was married to a racist woman, and she actually wrote the lyrics to the song "Hail to the Redskins," which if you ever went to a Washington football game, anytime they'd score a touchdown, they'd play this song. Well, there's a lot of derogatory comments in the song. Well, there was this guy in Texas who wanted to have an expansion team, and all the owners in the NFL said, yeah, that's great, but the Washington owner, he said no, because he knew he had the entire South, because he's like, oh, we don't allow black players on our teams, and so we're going to keep it nice and pure. Well, unbeknownst to him, the guy in Texas bought the rights to his wife's song, "Hail to the Redskins," and he said, oh, I'll tell you what, you're never going to play that song again unless you give me an expansion team. And so the owner of Washington, he begrudgingly allowed the guy to create an expansion team, and the guy called his team the Dallas Cowboys. And I thought, I never knew that story. That was a fascinating. I'll read a 700-page book for a little anecdote like that. And this is what, when we're talking to leaders, I mean, this is how leaders inspire their teams. I mean, when I had read the biography of Elon Musk by Ashley Vance, and there was two stories in there that cracked me up. He's at a Mexican restaurant with his biographer, and he says, well, I have a new girlfriend. I'm considering allocating 8.5 hours a week to her. Do you think that's enough? I'm like, wow, who thinks like that? And then the other story, this was a really good story. So a lot of people don't know that Elon Musk still reads a book a day. So richest man in the world, folks. This is a good idea. He was bullied all the time as a kid, and so he spent all of his time in the library and in bookstores reading everything. And when they interviewed engineers at SpaceX, and the SpaceX engineers were starting to get kind of annoyed because Elon Musk would walk around, he'd ask them questions, and they're like, man, I'm already hired. Why are you interviewing me again? But then they started talking to one another, and they're like, wait a sec. His questions are becoming more sophisticated. He's listening to our answers. He's learning it. And I think he knows it better than me now. And I was like, wow, that's a fascinating, I'll read a whole book the Walter Isaacson biography on Steve Jobs. I mean, I devoured that thing. There's so many anecdotes, and that's a very fair biography because it shows his good points and his bad points. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems right now in leadership training is people love to condemn people. And I'm like, you know what? Unless you're Jesus Christ, you have something dark in your past. There's something that all of us have to be embarrassed about. The standards that we hold others to, but not ourselves, just cracks me up. And so that's what I'm always looking for is, well, what can we learn? What are the positives to learn, but also what are the negatives to learn from people? And so if I'm trying to get people excited about reading, I find out what they're excited about, and I'll just start giving them anecdote after anecdote. Now, I have one of the largest book clubs online, lazyreaders.com. Anybody listening, you can subscribe for free. Every month I give 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you have something you can read when you're stuck in a boring meeting. And again, this is to get people realizing reading doesn't mean it has to be Dostoevsky, some 900-page Russian novel. I mean, when I taught second grade, I had a little boy, Kiara, And Kiara's first grade teacher told me, Kiara don't know nothing. I'm like, well, thank you for that. Well, Kiara, who don't know nothing, he comes into my room one day. He's like, hey, Mr. Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points and 16 boards. I'm like, thank you, Kiara. Because from that day forward, Doug, every day after lunch, I'd sit Kiara on my lap. We'd read the LA Times sports page together. And would you know it? By the end of the year, Kiara was one of my best readers. And all that kid was reading about was sports. But that's what, I mean, it kills me when you had told me that story a couple of weeks ago about second grade. I'm like, oh, they just destroyed a reader, you know? And so I'm like, okay, but your story hasn't ended. And, you know, you are a reader. You just, you're not the type of reader that they wanted you to be. And that's fine. That's fine. You've done well. And so that, like, when I'm talking to people and executives, I mean, I give a hard time to executives. I'm like, well, when was the last time somebody at work asked you to read a novel? I mean, they're not asking you to read novels. They're asking you to read technical reports and things like that. Right. It's a very different type of reading, you know, and I'm not putting down any type of reading. I'm saying what you should do. I mean, one of the best devices for me is my cell phone. So when I found out it can make alerts every day now on my cell phone, I'm trying to learn things. So like there's pieces of scripture. I'm not one of these people that always can just cite from the Bible so quickly. And so now I'm trying to learn, you know, so for, you know, I had John 3:6 every day at 3:16, I'd get John 3:16 and I'd memorize that. I've done, now I do James 1, 2, 3. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. The only reason I know that is I scheduled it in. Right now I'm trying to learn the Teddy Roosevelt quote about the credit belongs to the man in the arena. I don't have it memorized yet. I'm trying to learn the at 4:03 every day I have an alert, because in Act 4, Scene 3 of Shakespeare's King Henry V, Henry V has his St. Crispian Day speech, which is like 50 lines long. I've got it pretty much down now, Doug. But wow. I love this thing. This thing's great. I mean, that's great. This is something everybody listening, you can do it, and you can do it for personal things too. I mean, I was married on December 20th, so every day at 12:20, I have a reminder to tell my wife that I love her. You know, and people are like, well, that's not very romantic. I'm like, actually, it's very romantic because it gets done. You know, things that get scheduled get done.
You know, that's a key point. And I'll go back to your comment about Musk seriously asking his biographer about how much time to schedule with his new girlfriend. I talk to my clients about that a lot, that you're right. The thing we have in common, every one of us walking this earth, is that we've got the 24 hours in a day and all those seconds that get packed into that. So I always ask clients the question, what do you think's different about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or somebody like that is historically a high achiever? The very first thing that's different about them is their intentionality of how they spend that time. And everything is planned, everything is programmed, everything is thoughtful, and not, it's not a kind of anal retentiveness that drives that. It's a sense of purpose. It's a sense of design and desire for what they want to accomplish. And, you know, kudos to them. And the rest of us mere mortals, you know, we kind of, have to work through that.
But that's why we should read, Doug. I mean, it's a very basic formula. I mean, I call it the Viper formula. I mean, Bezos or Musk or Warren Buffett. I mean, Viper is just, because I was an educator. It has to be an acronym if you want to remember something. And so the V is for your vision. So all of these guys have a grand vision. So Elon Musk, his vision is that he's going to save the planet. He's going to save the human race. And he thinks that we might destroy this planet. And so he's very interested in colonizing Mars. Bill Gates had that vision, a computer in every home. I mean, this is only 40 years ago that home computers were pretty much non-existent. Now everybody has a home computer on their person. Right. So that's the V is the grand vision, which is the telescopic lens. Now, the microscopic lens is what you were just talking about, which is the plan. You have to come up with a plan. And the way you do that is you schedule your time. I mean, I love John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach. He was coaching for 27 years, and every single practice, 2 hours before practice, he scheduled up how every minute of that practice was going to be run. And what was interesting, if you look at him, is he ran his practices exactly 2 hours. And I thought that was a really important lesson, because all of his players knew practice is from 3:30 to 5:30. He's not keeping them late. And so what that did is they always gave 110% because they knew 5:30 is the stop line. You see a lot of these guys, and then they try and get an extra 10 minutes or 20 minutes here, and factor the go full speed right now. And so that's the plan. And then the R is your results. I mean, the other thing I make fun of people is that I'm a speaker, and so there's a lot of speakers that they're thought leaders. I'm like, well, there's a lot of people that have lots of thoughts. I'm a results leader. Let's talk about how do we actually get something accomplished. I don't really care what your thoughts are. I mean, there's plenty of thoughts in Washington, D.C. How much are they getting accomplished? Let's look at the results. Let's look at, I mean, that's what I love about sports is at the end of the day, there's a score. That's your measure. Did you get to where you have to be? And that's why I love sport. I mean, I was just sharing with somebody the other day. I'm not a good golfer, but I'm a golf fanatic. And I was saying, well, most people know that Jack Nicklaus won 18 majors, more than any other golfer of all time. Second place is Tiger Woods, is won 15. But most people forget that Jack took second in 19 majors.
Yeah.
That was pretty amazing.
Yeah, pretty amazing. That's right.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
Danny,
and an amazing human being.
We're up on a break point here. I want to hang on to that idea of, and I want to pick up on the sports analogy. I've got a thought about the notion of halftime. I'm gonna plant that seed with everybody as we go to break here, and then we'll be right back after this message.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
Well, hello, everyone. We're back, and I am visiting with Danny Brassell. We're talking about leaders being readers, and you've probably heard that phrase before, but if you've never really kind of taken it in and really thought about what that means to the possibilities, that's what we're talking about today. When we left before the break, Danny, we were talking a little bit about sports analogies of things, and I wanted to bring up, there's a book I read a number of years ago. It's called Halftime, and it's by a guy named Bob Buford. He is now deceased, but Bob was a native of East Texas. He made millions of dollars in the cable business before cable was what it is now. He was a pioneer in it, to say the least, but he suffered a tragic family accident. His oldest son was killed in a drowning accident as a teenager, and it caused him to go into a bit of a spiral and not so much in deep depression, but just rethinking everything. It's like, I've achieved all this wealth. What's it really worth? What does it really mean? And he came up with this idea of this model of halftime, and it is a football analogy. It's, team comes out with a game plan. They play the first half, and they might be getting their tails kicked, right? So they go in at halftime, and the coaches maybe modify the plan. They talk to the team. They figure out a way to make it different and have a more significant second half to come out with and hopefully win the game, turn the tide and win the game. In Bob's way of describing it, he said, most of us spend the first half of our life striving for success, whether that's wealth or fame or title or position, neighborhood, car, whatever you want to call it. But inevitably, if that's been your pursuit, you're going to wake up one day and you're going to have that same question, and it won't take a tragic event to change your mind or make you aware. You will ask the question, what am I doing? What is all this worth? So Bob's argument is that everybody needs a halftime adjustment, and you need to reassess a good definition of purpose and ultimately significance that can be your second half of your game. And so it's the difference between success and significance. And that was a powerful message to me back I was in my late 40s when I was introduced to the book. So chronologically, I was a little young to have that revelation, but I was so thankful I did. And it has been a really powerful, mindset for me to think about that. And I've shared that with a lot of my clients over time. Bob founded an organization out of Dallas. It's called the Halftime Institute, still exists to this day. They've got life coaches and business advisors that help aspiring entrepreneurs and successful business people make that change at halftime and think through their own second half game plan, so to speak. And he does have a follow-up book, by the way, named Game Plan. It's a sister book to it. It's a great set of two books if you're hungry and looking for something like that.
Check it out. You know me, I'll go for it. I mean, it sounds a lot like Andrew Carnegie, because Andrew Carnegie, when he passed away, they found the note card in his desk that he had two goals. His first goal was to spend the first half of his life accumulating the largest fortune in human history, and the second half of his life giving it away. Now, when I'm doing my masterminds with people, I say that, and I'm glad that you got that book when you're in your 40s, but I always tell people, like, wow, that we needed to give that to a teenager so that they can start making those adjustments right now. I mean, using the football analogy, it's great if you make a whole bunch of halftime adjustments. It's even better if you figure it out in the first quarter.
That's right. No, I agree totally. One more quick anecdote. I'm going to tie back to your comment in the first. You were describing Elon Musk, walking around talking to all these high-powered engineers he's got. And when they started comparing notes, they realized he was learning and actually becoming better than they were at a lot of that knowledge. I have a situation that I had the opportunity. I was coaching with a large global brand, and I had been working with a part of the leadership team, but they kept alluding to this guy that was one more level up in the organization. He wasn't CEO, but one more level above where they were. And they said, undeniably, he was always the smartest guy in the room. It didn't matter what the topic was. You were just challenged when you walked into the room with this guy. But one day there was a meeting and a topic came up, and everybody was amazed that he was genuinely stumped at what they were talking about. So there were these peers, and the peers left the meeting with this almost giddy excitement. We finally got the guy. He's not the smartest guy in the room. We got him, but there was a commitment to a follow-up meeting. And when they went back for the follow-up about 2 days later, he was the smartest guy in the room again on that new topic. And he had gone home. Somebody had the gumption to ask him, how did you go from yesterday to today? What happened? He said, oh, well, you gave me the outline. He said, I went and researched it, and I found my materials, and I read everything I could find to know it. So now here's my questions. And they're like, oh, wow.
I love that. That's what you should all, again, it goes back to John Wooden. He said, it's the things you learn after you know it all that make the biggest difference. And too many of us, I don't know about you, Doug, but the older I get, the more I realize I really don't know that much. It's amazing to me. But I love it. I'm very curious. And I've actually thought about having a podcast just to be able to interview people like you, because I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun. You get to really learn about things. I was a journalist before I was a teacher, and that was what drew me to journalism, was learning about things I wanted to be the next Charles Kuralt. I wanted to do all these stories about small towns in America, and instead they put me on the political beat, and I want to slit my wrist. But I'm a naturally curious person. I'm always trying to figure, and that's why I read. I'm constantly looking for the book I'm writing right now. I'm having so much fun researching it, because the last book I wrote was The Leadership Begins with Motivation. And after I wrote the book, I realized completely unintentionally, most of the example, this is kind of like my homage to Paul Harvey. When I was a when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only school teacher in the history of my school not to have a single student tardy, because I always started off class reading a Paul Harvey story. It's a perfect 5-minute read aloud. And the kids always wanted to figure out, who is I talking about? But Doug, a lot of those stories are dated. I mean, it's about like Sears and Roebuck, and, you know, kids today don't know what Sears and Roebuck are. So I decided to write an updated book, and it has like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and those types of stories. Completely unintentionally, I read the book after I wrote it. I'm like, whoa, almost all my stories are about white male Americans. And I'm like, I need to create another book. And so the book I'm writing right now is focused on females, minorities, and international success stories. And I'm having so much fun. Like,
oh yeah,
I never heard about this person.
I bet, because that is a whole extra dynamic that is fascinating when you get into it. I've had the good fortune to have a client book that's pretty diverse, both gender and ethnicity, and I love every opportunity when that, you know, comes up that way. I was going to ask you oh goodness, I just think I lost my train of thought on it. It'll, as a friend said, the carousel will come back around in a minute.
That's right.
I love your Paul Harvey story, you know, just having be able to have that attention. You know, I'm going to tie in something that I've had a couple of recent episodes on the podcast where my guests have talked about the power of leaders being able to tell great stories.
Yeah, I love the guy that had the 7 stories.
The 7 story, yeah. Carrey and Theracon, he's out of Canada. It was fascinating.
I got to grab it. Does he have a book about that? If he has a book, I got to grab that book.
Yeah. The book title, I'll put a plug in for it because I love it. It's the 7 essential stories that charismatic leaders tell. Yeah. And it is tied. He got the idea from reading some of the history of Apple Computer when Steve Jobs hired his first major marketing guy, and I'm drawing a blank on the gentleman's name that was the marketing guru, but he said, there are only 7 great stories in the world. And he said, every world religion has the same 7 stories. And if you take those 7 and you apply them to business, and by the way, folks, I'm referring to episode 17 on the podcast. If you want to, it's the 2022 series, episode 17. Carrey and Theracon is the gentleman's name that was my guest. Fabulous guy, neat guy. He did a lot of his own research for this and articulates the 7 great stories very well. And one thing he said that I liked, because I confess that even in some of my own effort to run businesses and coach people, there were a couple of stories I believed in understanding, and I encouraged people to get them. The first, chief of which was just the general vision. You know, where are we going? Why are we going to win? What do we need? What are we about? You know, and of course, Simon Sinek famously calls it the why story, you know.
What's your why? I mean, it always comes down to what's your why. I mean, you know, that's the old story of the different bricklayers at the cathedral, and they ask them what they're doing, and a couple of them say that they're laying bricks, and the third one's like, I'm creating a cathedral. I mean, what's the story you're telling yourself? What's your why?
Right. And it has everything to do with it. So the point in that episode was for a leader to cast that vision for the company, there's more to and more layers to the story you ought to be thinking about telling. And to be the effective leader, you want to be able to reinforce those stories to the whole audience, to the whole population of your employees, so that they can buy in. And I love the way where that ties in, because I remind people there's a phrase that says a confused mind says no. And
that's right. That's right. I like that. That's a really good.
As a leader,
you make sure you highlight that in your show notes. That's a good one.
If you're not a leader creating clarity for everybody around you, it's a big challenge. And so as studies tell us, people relate to stories, they don't particularly relate to directives. So if you can tell them a story instead of a directive, you're going to be a lot closer to being able to build that clarity that people need.
this is what I learned as a teacher, Doug. I mean, I just have to always simplify things and put it into, and like working with kindergartners is the same as working with business executives. I actually was just doing a training and they couldn't believe it because they'd been taught Maslow's social hierarchy of needs, and none of them ever understood it. And I'm like, oh, there's an easy way to remember it. P.S. I love you. P is your baseline, your physiological, your most basic needs. S is your safety needs. The I will get back to the I want you to think of the I above the pyramid on the back of a dollar bill is your self-actualization needs. This is when it's more about giving to others than getting for you. The U is your esteem needs, and love is love and belonging needs. And like I had so many guys afterwards and ladies, they're just like, man, I'll remember that now. And I'm like, well, that's the trick, is how do you get people? I mean, that's where Einstein's brilliance was he would give visual. I love, you should read Dr. Richard Feynman. I mean, the guy could explain, very complex concepts, but he'd make visualizations and stories of them. I mean, and that's that episode 17 about the 7 stories. I mean, really what it is, it's Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. You hear different storytellers now. One of my favorites is a guy by the name of Donald Miller, runs a great company, Story Brand, and that's exactly what he's training people as well.
Right.
What is your story? I mean, when it's just a corporation, nobody likes it, but when you actually give a story about it, I mean, I kick myself that I never got to meet Herb Kelleher, because the story of Southwest Airlines is one of my favorite stories. At one, I don't know if you know this, because when Southwest had finally won its,
got you locked up here. I hope we may have to
lawsuits at one point, Southwest Airlines was the #1 liquor distributor in the state of Texas.
Yep. Oh, I'm getting some internet interference here.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
You hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, I don't remember we got into this when we were doing the pre-show, but I know I had it on another episode. I have my own personal Herb Kelleher story because he was on the board at the bank I worked for.
Oh, wow.
So he was a routine guest at our weekly officer meeting whenever we were having a board meeting in town. And Herb was just as gregarious a character as has been made out. I can attest to that in real life.
That's great.
But one day, I'll be quick about this. One day, somebody asked him the question, Herb, do you believe customers are always right? And he says, oh, heck no. And of course, that's not what Herb said. But he said, let me tell you a story real fast. And he did the story thing. Rainy day in Dallas, bad weather, planes were backed up, schedule was shot. People were in the terminal, frustrated, couldn't get their flights. And there was one part of the old Love Field that was the convergence of 3 different gates. They were all in just one sitting area. So a lot of people sitting there, and one guy showed up, one customer, and he was already drunk. And he was obnoxious. He was verbally abusing everybody, especially the gate agents who were giving him the bad news that the plane wasn't there. Well, this went on for an hour and a half, 2 hours. Finally, the plane started filtering through. His flight arrived and was ready to board, and he jumps up and muscles his way through the crowd, only to find 2 Dallas police officers waiting to arrest him and haul him off.
Great. Love it.
And the terminal erupted with applause and cheers and everything, because everybody was fed up with this guy. So Herb said to us, he said, now who do you think was happy? He said, I made one guy really mad. My gate people did, which they have the authority to do. He said, we made one guy really, really mad, but we made about 400 customers very loyal and faithful that day.
That's exactly right.
And it was funny when I was sharing that on the other episode, one of my other guests talking about storytelling, he asked me, he said, Doug, time out. He said, when did you hear that story? And I said, oh gosh, that was probably 1983, something like that. And he goes, and you're still telling it to this day, right?
Exactly.
He said,
the person that was really good with that, Doug, was President Reagan, I believe, was the first president on his State of the Union address. Now all of them do it. You'll watch this. There's there's that saying that I think it was Stalin actually who said that one dead is a tragedy, a million dead is a statistic. And Reagan knew this, and you've seen every president since him copy it. Is during the State of the Union, rather than talk about, I'll do random. This isn't political. This is just random issues. So we'll say, oh, I'm going to give healthcare to the 18 million Americans that need healthcare, whatever. Well, Reagan wouldn't do that. He's like, there's Bob Clark from Louisville, Kentucky, up in the Gallup. Bob, stand up. Bob works at the GM plant, and they don't give him sufficient healthcare, and it means he doesn't. And now everybody remembers. They understand healthcare now because they think of Bob Clark. They don't think of this grand concept, and it's a really smart technique. And that's what, when I'm working with leaders on crafting I'm like, no, back to the basics, man. People don't remember complex things. They remember it when you simplify it for them. You can talk about complex things, but you got to make it understandable to people. And that's where the best leaders, that's why I would have loved to have met Herb Kelleher is I'm like, I know that this guy always had a story. Anybody who starts off his daily breakfast is a cigarette and a Cheez-It cracker, he's a different cat.
Yeah, Herb was a different cat. Just another, not to beat it to death, another quick story on him. First time he was invited to speak to our audience, we had just built a new building and had this glorious new auditorium where we were having these meetings, and he walks in puffing on his Marlboro, and somebody says, Herb, we don't smoke in this auditorium. He said, well, then you don't want to hear me. And he said, turned around and headed for the door. And they said, okay, whoa, okay, we'll make an exception. Come on in. Come on. So, no, he was a great guy, though. You forgive a lot of sins with the...
Great example for everybody. Life's too short. I mean, he blends, there's an exercise. So I run masterminds with my friend Davey Tyberski. He's a time management expert. And, it's modeled a lot on what Zig Ziglar used to do with spokes in a wheel. And so, again, I'm the teacher. And so I think that in order to be successful, success is based on your fitness, your financial, your family, your faith, your fun, and your fulfillment. And these are all spokes in the wheel. So an exercise I'll run with the leaders. I'm like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you doing financially? And they're like, oh, I made $50 million last year. I'm like, great. So you're a 10. I'm like, how are you doing with your family? Are you spending a lot of time with your family? Well, I haven't taken a day off. I'm like, okay, what do you give yourself? And I'll give myself a 2. And then the exercise is then you take all of those ratings on the spokes of the wheel and you try to make a circle. And if it's not a circle, it means you're out of balance. And we have to figure out, and nobody's in balance, Doug. I mean, it always cracks me up also when people are, oh, you're trying to find the work-life balance. I'm like, folks, sometimes you're going to work 120 hours a week, and sometimes you're on a beach somewhere. I mean, that's just life. Life is not like this perfect balance. It's just you need to also have the right mindset. I was just in Silicon Valley with some people yesterday. It's just all they were talking about was money. And I'm like, when was the last time you took a day off? Like 5 years ago. He said it boasting. And I'm like, this is a very wealthy individual. And but that's all he's thinking about. Even there's a great book. A lot of people think it's good. I'll paraphrase, but it's like, it doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. It's like when you make money your God, that's evil. And this guy's all about the money. I'm like, you've put money at the expense of he's overweight. It just drove me nuts. I'm like, you got to think beyond the money. And I'm not thinking, I think money's great. I love money. Everybody should love money, but it shouldn't be at the expense of. You shouldn't be on your third wife. You shouldn't be shipping your kids off to boarding school and never get to see the kids. You shouldn't be able to brag that it's been 20 years since you've been to church or temple or whatever. I mean, I don't know. It's just a little bit different. I think that you're not a success unless you're really trying to look at all these and you're analyzing it all the time. I mean, I have exercises I do with myself every week. I'm like, okay, I had a good week fitness wise, but not family wise. I was, I'm not really what I liked your term, significance versus success. I thought that was really good. Was this a significant week or was this a successful week? What's the difference between those things? This is great. This is why I like your podcast, Doug. You got me thinking.
I like what you're talking about with the wheel, the spoke in the wheel and the circle and everything. I do a similar exercise on that and tie it to helping people find their sense of personal purpose in the world. There really has to be some kind of balance. And I learned this back in the 2008 timeframe when we had the big recession, and so many people, unemployment went up to the double digits, and people were losing jobs for the first time in 20 or sometimes 30 years. And I got involved in a nonprofit that I created to help people with that job transition. And I quickly figured out the real pain in that was, at least for the men, it was the loss of identity. That job was their identity. And I saw these empty souls, walking into the room. And I'm like, and I got to where I would, if a new guy showed up, I would say, tell me something about yourself. And you know what they did? Well, I'm an engineer and I did that. And I said, nope, wrong answer.
Yeah.
I said, you haven't told me anything about you. What about you? Where are you from? Are you married? Do you have kids? What? I don't care.
I love that you're doing that, Doug. I did a church retreat, and it was the same thing. Is you tell people who you were, but you couldn't tell them what you did. And guys are just lost if you don't talk about your job. It's a great exercise. I love that.
That's right. So it is so important. And I think the message here, folks, is the idea that if you don't have a method or a discipline about finding that evaluation, Danny's got a great model that he's described here. Just hit the rewind button in a couple of minutes and you'll get that again. But and there's a bunch of them out there. But the whole idea is, again, go back to what we said in the first half about intentional use of your time in the day. Do that assessment and see if you've slowly started drifting off course and you want to get back on to a plan and a purpose and some intentionality of where you want to go. Very critical information. Danny, I think on that note, I need to wrap this thing up. This has been phenomenal. I've loved having you on here. Tell folks how to get a hold of you, and you've got a special surprise you were going to share.
Yeah, as a gift for people bearing with me and listening to my anecdotes today, I want to give everybody a complimentary copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. So if you just go to freegiftfromdanny.com, you'll get a copy of Read, Lead, and Succeed. It's a book I wrote for a school principal who was trying to keep his faculty positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, I give you an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. And it's really just to keep people in a positive mindset. I mean, a lot of us are forgetting that this pandemic has really hit a lot of people psychologically these last couple of years. And sure. The two best things I did during the pandemic, Doug, is I stopped watching the news and I bought a spray bottle. So now whenever somebody talks politics to me, I just spray them in the face. I'm like, be away, be away.
I love it.
Yeah, we need a lot more positivity. That's why, and I'm preaching to the choir. People that are listening to this podcast are people that want to improve themselves, improve the world around them. And so again, if they go to freegiftfromdanny.com, that's my gift. And I really appreciate the gift of your time today, Doug. Thanks for all you do.
Well, you're very welcome, Danny, and thank you for showing up here. So, folks, we're going to bring this to a close, and I do want to remind you, if you're listening to this on your favorite audio channel, we do have a video recording of this. You can see the two handsome guys that have been talking to you for the last almost hour. It's over on my YouTube channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense, and we hope to see you there. And I would ask you, if you do hop over there, please subscribe. You'll get notices about new episodes we're releasing every week, actually 2 a week now. So real happy about that. And again, thank you for listening in. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.